Hello, you joined me on a Sunday just to do a bit of an update on this little guy, which was the Mobula 65 HDZero, which I changed to the Mobula 7 frame. So Hamish and I are just going to tell you all about it and give you a bit of an update. And I'm just going to share some sort of flight footage which really explains the reason why I wanted to increase the frame size a little bit. Basically just to give it more outdoor ability, and of course in any sort of wind you can't really fly this guy, it'll bobble and wobble around, but when it's pretty calm you can have a really good time. And I'm not, by no means an expert when it comes to whoops, but I've been sort of playing around with different tunes, so I'll show you what I've been running on and just give you a general update on what I've found so far really. So here she is, and obviously we're now running, in this case, a Mobula 75 V3 frame, and as you can see this one has been absolutely smashed and crashed hundreds of times literally as I learned to try and fly these tiny whoops. And I'm running this Ort little antenna which has had a hard life. I found this probably increases your signal maybe sort of 20% or so. It doesn't sort of turn it into obviously a long range quad, but what it does seem to do is when you get the snow effect it kind of hangs on in there a little bit better. And basically I just use a little 3D printed gizmo I've put in there because on this particular frame it's made for 2S batteries and obviously I'm using 1S. And the GNB 27 connector on these GNB batteries has been a bit of a game changer actually. Gone is the immense LiPo sag, and there's been a bit of an issue with people saying that these connectors get really loose. I think there's been a bit of an update because certainly these ones have remained super tight, and I've put quite a lot of packs through these guys now. But really this video is just to show you why I did this and the benefits of swapping from a 65mm to a 75mm. And I think the only downside and the only reason I wouldn't do this is if you're actually doing proper whoop races and you're limited to a 65mm frame, in which case you're kind of stuck with you know, the Mobula HDZero 65mm as it comes. But if you add that extra 1 centimetre, it really does bring it alive. The first thing I'm going to start with is mine HDZero system seems to have a bug, or at least I think it's a bug, because basically every time I arm the quad I get zero signal, and then I have to disarm, the signal comes back, and then arm again, and I don't know whether that's an issue that I've got or whether that's a setting that I've set or something like that, but it's a little bit annoying. But this footage is basically why I wanted to increase this little whoops capability of flying outdoors, because I'm living where they're building, and being able to sort of sneak into these new build houses and fly around it near silently without disturbing anybody is so much fun. And clearly, as I said, this guy's outdoor capabilities are limited. If you watch the flight footage, you'll see as soon as the wind picks up and I come outside of this sort of square of buildings, the quad sort of wobbles around like nobody's business, and that's basically because the wind is hitting it. And it makes it very difficult to tune, because the tune itself feels amazing when there's no wind, and then as soon as the wind picks up and the quad wobbles and gets blown around, it's very difficult to know whether that's a tuning issue or whether it's just the way it is with such a lightweight little whoop. And as I said, HDZero, while I'm getting a lot of flickers and breakup in this footage, it holds in there absolutely fine. And of course it's not comparable to DJI, which could do this with its eyes closed, but again DJI is using much higher power, 700 milliwatt or 1200 etc if you crank it all the way up. But HDZero handles this absolutely fine. And as I said, that antenna's had a pretty hard life, so it's probably not working at its best. But you can see here as the wind hits me side on, the quad's sort of wobbling around a little bit, and it makes it hard to line it up. But as soon as you come into these indoor bits, the quad tightens up and it suddenly flies really well. And I'm using basically 3 different tunes because I'm sort of trying to learn whoop settings as such. Obviously, I tend to fly much bigger quads, and to be honest, prior to this, I hated whoops. So the fact that I'm still flying this and having fun with it is a tantamount to how good it really is, because it's not really my bag. But again, you can see I can just power through. It's got plenty of punch out to gain altitude above these houses. And okay, the signal's in and out, but it's still really flyable. And of course, this thing still doesn't have a huge amount of power. You can do flips and power loops, etc. But if you ever ask it to come out of a hard dive really close to the ground and give it full beans, you will get a little bit of yaw washout. But it happens for few and far between, and is generally because you've been far too late on the power. And credit to the actual Happy Model original 65mm HDZero little quad. While I've been sort of flying at this area, it's covered in builder's grit and really fine sort of cement dust and things like that. And this quad has sort of been stuck in that dust. The motors have been jammed up. I've tried turtle modding out when it's been stuck in dust too deep to get out. And the little ESCs, the little 5 amp ESCs on the flight controller have held up. I haven't lost anything, everything's still working. And that in itself is a bit of a miracle, because every time I pick this thing up and it's covered and looks absolutely grey from all this crap in this building site, I'm kind of expecting it to go at any time, especially when I'm arming it and suddenly one motor isn't spinning because the frame's been bent out of line or the motor's full of rubbish. But after, as I said, after dusting it off, it's really been absolutely fine and good as new every time I've needed to set off again. And indoors, it's also a completely different animal. It's got so much more authority than it did have as a 65mm whoop, and although it's bigger, for me it's so much easier to fly, simply because it's got so much power to so much more disc area from the props. And I can fly much faster than I could with its 65mm brother. Now, of course, I'm still no whoop pilot. This is all sort of alien to me. I don't tend to fly whoops, and I certainly don't fly in angle mode as I am doing here inside my house, simply because unless you have a sort of big open plan property, it's pretty hard to fly acro in a small sort of UK property. But it just sort of rips around, and although we're still not getting massive flight times, you're probably looking at sort of 4.5 minutes flying indoors, and a good 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes perhaps, sort of whooping around outside. Although of course, if you're on the throttle, a lot of the time that's going to drop fairly substantially. But I'm just having so much fun with it, and that's the reason really why I'm making this video, because as somebody who's had these things before and they're fun for 2 minutes and then you get bored of them, the fact that I can take this out on a calm day and just mess around in one of these building sites or somewhere close proximity, and then of an evening, if I'm bored, just get it out and zoom around the house, is really down to the little Happy Model stuff, which is as I said, has been bulletproof and reliable for me. But more importantly, and it's a shallow thing to say, but just because I can see where I'm going now, the fact that this little whoop has HDZero on board has basically just made it for me. That's the thing that's always turned me off whoops, as fun as they always were. The cameras were so bad on them, certainly in low light conditions, that you just couldn't see where you're going, and HDZero has got rid of that. And as I said in my earlier review, there's nothing else around at the moment that has this capability. So for me, I'm super grateful that your FPV sent me this to try out, and I didn't really expect to like it. I thought obviously I'd review it fairly as someone who's heavily into DJI. And give it a fair crack of the whip, but the fact that, as I said, I'm still flying this and having fun and messing around and crashing with it after all this time, or not all this time, but after so much time has passed, is for me proof in the pudding. So yeah, shout out to Happy Model. I think you've made a cracking little whoop. Shout out to HDZero. Although the range etc isn't what I'm used to on DJI, it's perfectly adequate for what I'm doing here. And the board itself has been completely reliable, even though it's been through you know, the mill and back with me crashing and bashing it. And albeit it's got this weird arming issue, I don't know, as I said, if that's some sort of setting that I've messed with or whether it's just a sort of bug in the system. But it's not the end of the world. The Mobula itself, by the way, does have an issue which you may or may not come across, and that's if you leave it plugged in to beta flight for any sort of length of time, which can be, you know, 10 seconds to a couple of minutes. My one basically goes into boot mode, and I believe that's it basically because of the flight controller needs a little resistor on it, which it doesn't have. If you're coming across that particular issue, what's worked for me is if you plug a battery in, it doesn't do that. And what seems to work is if you're having this issue, plug a battery in, give it a couple of seconds, and then unplug the battery, and it tends to be a lot more reliable. Then alternatively, just put HDZero onto 0 milliwatts and keep the battery plugged in and do it that way. Obviously everything's going to get a little bit warm, but it's less annoying than having to keep unplugging your USB cable every time. So yeah, that's it from me. Absolutely loving mooching around and messing around with it, and I hope this has been useful. I'm going to flash up onto the screen now the tune that I was flying, which has been working really well. As I said, regardless of tune, it's going to be crap in the wind, but as soon as the wind drops, it flies really well. Cheers guys, thanks, bye bye.